And the reason is simple, because the conflict is not about the creation of a Palestinian state. It's about the existence of a Jewish state. And I can quote Palestinian ministers saying precisely that as well, and I can tick down the list from Nabil Shaath, who said we will never accept two states for two peoples, to President Abbas, who said we will never accept a Jewish state, to Farouk Kaddoumi, to Abbas Zaki, to on and on down the list, to Sultan Abu al-Ainain, who actually said, slit the throat of every Israeli wherever you find them.
Yeah. The Secretary of State, John Kerry, says a two-state solution in the Middle East is in serious jeopardy due to Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. U.S.-Israeli relations have hit rock bottom over the path to peace. We're going to discuss now with the spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's David Keyes, and he joins us now. David, thank you. I appreciate your time this morning. John Kerry said that you're essentially building on what would become a Palestinian state, which means building settlements. It tears down the two-state solution. Is Israel still committed to a two-state solution?
The Prime Minister remains absolutely committed to a solution of two states for two peoples, and Jews living in the West Bank does not prejudice that outcome in any way. What was so disappointing about Secretary Kerry's speech was that it didn't really deal with the core issue of why this conflict continues to rage, and that has precisely nothing to do with the presence of Jews in the West Bank and everything to do with the Palestinian leadership's continued refusal to recognize a Jewish state. Israel's Prime Minister has called on President Abbas to meet literally hundreds of times for direct peace talks. He even invited him to speak in the Knesset. And unfortunately, President Abbas has said no to recognizing Israel as a Jewish state, no to direct negotiations, and no to condemning the horrific hate speech against Jews and Israelis that's a daily occurrence on Palestinian media. So instead of focusing on the actual barriers to peace, this has basically done a bait and switch where people think
We have a problem with our satellite there. And did we get David Keyes back? Is he back? He's back. Okay, so Mr. Keyes, I think you got the last part of your statement. I'm sorry, we had a little glitch in the satellite there. And so to that end, talking about recognizing Israel, your education minister said absolutely no to a Palestinian state. Your justice minister called a Palestinian state ISIStan or Hamastan. Your agriculture minister opposes a Palestinian state. How do you intend to pursue peace with that kind of a government?
Well, because in this government, even though there's a diversity of voices, the Prime Minister is called the Prime Minister for a reason, and he supports two states for two peoples. And the vast majority of Israelis yearn for an end to this conflict. I think that if the Palestinians wanted a state, they could have had it a long time ago, but every time they've been offered a state, as happened in 1947 and 1937, 10 years before, and 2000 and 2008, every time they were offered, they said no. And the reason is simple, because the conflict is not about the creation of a Palestinian state. It's about the existence of a Jewish state. And I can quote Palestinian ministers saying precisely that as well, and I can tick down the list from Nabil Shaath, who said we will never accept two states for two peoples, to President Abbas, who said we will never accept a Jewish state, to Farouk Kaddoumi, to Abbas Zaki, to on and on down the list, to Sultan Abu al-Ainain, who actually said, slit the throat of every Israeli wherever you find them.
Yeah, and
that
now
is the real barrier to peace, not a democratic and liberal Israel that has had its hand extended to peace for peace from day one.
So I want to ask you this. The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says peace negotiations can begin as soon as the building stops. Is that enough? Is that enough reason to stop the building?
Well, the building actually was stopped by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and President Abbas didn't take that too seriously, and that's because the issue isn't actually the settlements or the presence of Jews, which actually links back to this outrageous UN Security Council resolution, which has the audacity to call the Western Wall occupied Palestinian territory. And I think a good question for you to ask administration officials is, will they veto any future resolution at the Security Council dealing with Israel?
Mr. Keyes, you will admit that you're the only nation in the world that supports that view. And I want to play this. This is John Kerry yesterday speaking of a New York Times headline from a Republican president back in 1987. Listen to this.
Let me read you the lead paragraph from a New York Times story dated December 23rd. I quote, "With the United States abstaining, the Security Council adopted a resolution today strongly deploring Israel's handling of the disturbances in the occupied territories." That story was not written last week. It was written December 23rd, 1987.
So Secretary Kerry has said that the Obama administration has been very supportive of Israel. You heard the headline there. It could have been written today. The question is, all this anger and bluster and posturing, is it a deflection that Israel does not support, no longer supports a two-state solution?
It's absolutely not a deflection, and the Prime Minister continues to support two states for two peoples. That headline could have been written decades ago as it was, but two wrongs don't make a right. And what also could have been written a few decades ago is the Palestinian rejection of any Jewish state. All you have to do is turn on Palestinian television, look at Palestinian maps, look at the fact that the Palestinian leadership is actually paying anyone who murders an Israeli a monthly salary to know what's truly the barrier to peace here. So the administration should be asked in no uncertain terms, will they veto any future resolutions against Israel at the United Nations? And the answer to that should be an unequivocal yes, they should veto it, because friends don't take friends to the Security Council. We can have a disagreement about that, but let us focus on the core issues of Palestinian rejectionism so that these two parties, Israelis and Palestinians, can come together and forge a lasting peace based off mutual recognition so that everyone in this region can have a future of hope and a future of peace.
And our
we
short
deserve
time
no less
left,
than that.
I don't mean to cut you off. We have a short time left here. But what I want to ask you is, when the incoming president has expressed his full support for Israel, and again, he is putting it out on Twitter. My question is, when was the last time the current president and Benjamin Netanyahu spoke?
Well, I don't have the precise minute of their last conversation, but they've spoken many, many times over the years. They've met many times over the years. Israel's deeply appreciative of the military assistance President Obama sent to Israel. That doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything. We've been in touch with the current administration and the incoming administration, as is only natural. But it's very disappointing to see this departure from U.S. policy, this abandonment of Israel at the UN, and the highlighting of what amounts to tangential issues to peace. Peace can be forged when at long last the Palestinians recognize our very right to exist and no longer call Tel Aviv a settlement.
The question
Let us
is,
focus on the issues that unite us so that we can forge a lasting peace.
Does Israel support an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem that has equal sovereignty to Israel, Mr. Keyes?
These are the final status issues which need to be worked out between the parties. I can't negotiate right now live on CNN. That's for President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu to sit down and work out all of these difficult issues. But you can't work out difficult issues if the other party won't even sit down with you. Ramallah is a few minutes away from here. And I would much rather be there right now negotiating peace with a Palestinian leader than talking to you, no offense. But unfortunately, the Palestinian leadership has said no to literally hundreds of calls for peace. What a
they
travesty
did say that
for
they
both
would sit
Israelis
down
and Palestinians,
if the building
that this
stopped.
Rejectionism, I understand that. They've said a lot of things, and when the building did stop, it didn't bring them to the table. And when Israel took out every single settlement from Gaza, it didn't bring them to the table. That's because that is not the issue. And I hope that we can find common ground in the near future.
David Keyes, we're out of time. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Right. Coming up in our next hour, we're going to get reaction from an official with the Palestinian Authority.
Right. We'll have that official react to Don's interview just now with David Keyes. That's ahead. Also,